Hello, hello. Welcome to the Geekscape Book Club and big shout outs all around. I, as always, am Christian Bladt, joined by the one, the future, the past, the present, everything, everywhere, all at once. The one, the only, Eric Connor. Hello, sir. Thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you very much. It was inevitable that I would join you. You see what I did there? The inevitability.
Yes, it was inevitable. We today, as always, here on the Geekscape Book Club, we discuss a book that neither of us have read. We have not discussed it. We are going to talk about it for the first time with both of you. Who are these comic books is another way that you could consider this conversation. And this month, Kang the Conqueror, Only Myself Left to Conquer. And really, Eric, when you think about it, don't we all have ourselves to conquer? I'll take my answer off the air. But I would like to talk about this book, which came recommended from Jonathan London, but also from the grand poobah of all the comic book movie specials here on the Geekscape Network, Ian Kerner. They both endorsed this book, which is one of the more recent books that we've read. This is from 2021. Written by both Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly, art by Carlos Magno, and you know what? Let's just shout out Espen Gurdon-Jerton, the color artist.
I think that name raises the dead. Actually, if you say it backwards, so be careful.
Well, if you say it 21 times in a darkened room, he appears in the mirror and he digitally colors everything that you have. What was your familiarity with the character of Kang the Conqueror before reading this book, Eric?
It's funny. I realized not as much as I had thought. Like, I think I feel like Kang is a character I knew visually. And
Sure.
again, I was like kind of preface, the bulk of my comic book reading was, early 80s up through like 87, so.
Yeah. I hung on a little bit longer than you. I mean,
then I would come back every again.
I'm about 83 till the early 90s, and I hung on to the X-Men until 99. So okay. Yeah, I think we read a lot of the same era.
Yeah, and what I thought of Kang. No, Kang.
Do I hear a briefcase opening?
I'm glad that we not only got Ted Kennedy but also Mayor Quimby into the conversation.
I mean, come on, vote Quimby. If you learn nothing else from this show,
Diamond Joe Quimby.
Yes, Diamond Joe Quimby. Also from the era we're talking about. But so yeah, right. That's around when you read Marvel Comics predominantly.
And I know he popped up. I mean, he's been a character for decades. I mean, right? So he's been around, and I just I realized he just, I guess, didn't leave the same imprint. Like, I know who he was, but if you just pulled me aside and asked me, I don't know, pre Ant-Man, or a few movies ago, who he was, I'd be like, oh, that guy.
Pre Loki, He Who Remains, basically.
Yeah, right. I wouldn't have been able to tell you much. So it was actually, once again, the fun of this. I don't know if you call it a podcast or an experiment, whatever it is. It's really been great to actually.
It's an experiment the way that Mystery Science Theater 3000 is an experiment,
Okay. And when I'm glad that
you're forced to participate.
I'm Crow, I think, is my
your
character.
Jokes and your quips are scripted.
Right. We have a whole staff right off camera writing us constant one-liners. And so I'm, and I think it's a really good introduction to him. I think this title here is like, I know, and you look for this. It's like primers almost for these characters. And I thought this one was so well rooted in character. I mean, the whole structure was tied in the character. And weirdly enough, and I don't want to spoil this film in case you haven't seen it, but it kind of reminded me of The Father. I don't know if you saw that film with Anthony Hopkins.
The Anthony Hopkins film. I did not get around to seeing that. He won an Oscar for it,
and when you see it, you'll see why. I mean, remember, it was him.
Well, and that was
Chadwick Boseman.
That was the film that everyone wanted. That was the category everyone wanted Chadwick Boseman to win. In fact, they saved that category for the end of that Oscars telecast, and then they get the moment with Sir Anthony Hopkins, who, telling me, oh, Anthony Hopkins is great in that movie is not hard to believe. It's
even with knowing how wonderful that actor is, you see this movie because the movie's all about the character has dementia,
Right. Sure.
and so the way the narrative thread goes is, and again, careful, I just don't want to ruin it for anyone, but
That's fun. Yeah.
you really feel what it's like to be him, and he, oh god, he's so good in it. But this storytelling here, the way it sort of circles in on itself, and we've seen that before, but
It's
I'll
very
give you
Tarantino.
completely, and we've got a touch of Memento in there, I
Yeah,
suppose, and
absolutely.
but yet I think like it did such a great job of helping me understand his struggle in ways that Ant-Man did not. As wonderful as Jonathan Majors is, like, who right now was arrested this weekend, by the
Yeah, I
way.
know. So like right now we're in a weird situation where we're not sure how highly
Who
we
knows?
should sing the praises of Jonathan Majors.
Yeah, no, it's a holding
But
pattern. We're in a
yeah,
holding pattern
what
like
are we
Kang,
allowed
right?
to think? But
Right.
it won't undo the fact that he's great in the Ant-Man film. And I'm
I know,
complimenting. Yeah,
and also the idea that they really found a terrific actor to play this character, especially after reading this and seeing it's
yeah,
all about kind of variations, and you this is why Marvel goes after these performers. It's not just because they're the big names, but also they're remarkably big talents.
yes,
And
agreed.
so they can do this. I mean, you needed a Robert Downey to build this house around, and then you needed a Jonathan Majors to usher in this next wave because we had such a terrific villain with Thanos. So they had to find like a real like a top-notch actor who also didn't come in with a lot of history. And
Right.
I think
Yeah.
perfectly cast. And yeah, although he's very different in this.
Very
Uh,
different in this, but I think by design,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, my familiarity with Kang mostly stretches from a storyline in the mid 80s Avengers, which is the introduction of the Council of Kings,
Right.
a book that I'm showing for our visual audience, Avengers 267 from, I believe, 1985. Maybe no, it's 1986 because it's Marvel's 25th anniversary. And apparently, this book in mint condition is worth $350 because it's the introduction at the Council of Kings. But that is just someone selling it, so I don't know if it's actually
Yeah,
worth that.
your copy that smells like McRib is worth almost $13, I heard.
Maybe $13, yeah. And it doesn't just smell like McRib. There's a
It
stain
tastes like
on
McRib.
page 15, that you can
15 through
find.
23. It
Right.
was a
Well, yeah. Let's be honest. I didn't.
you were a
I
growing
like
boy.
to savor my McRib. So that's kind of the era that I was most familiar with the character. I've definitely read other stories, and there's references to him. I read a lot more with Mortis, and we kind of had him in this era. And there's a character named the Druid that doesn't factor into this specific iteration, who is also Kang from a different part of his timeline, who was actually a member of the Avengers around issue 300. So, I didn't know a lot of the dots connected. And I thought that, yeah, this story, I can see why it came so recommended, because it, in a very nice circular style of storytelling, it really connects a lot of dots. It starts off with Nathaniel Richards in the 31st century. And right away, you're like, wait a minute. Kang always says he's from the 31st century. That sets off some alarms. And obviously the name Nathaniel Richards, he's a descendant of Reed and Sue Richards, and Uncle Benji and Uncle Johnny Storm, and the whole family. So I think it's interesting that Kang really starts off, if you were to untangle the string theory of all the time travel, and the beginning of your string, he is basically this Nathaniel Richards kind of longing for an existence more interesting, where everything is basically fine in the 31st century. So I thought it was interesting to kind of watch how he first meets Kang. And we know enough about Kang that we're like, all right, this meeting is not going to be what it seems. And then just a couple of different ways in which he repositions himself. Nathaniel Richards does. He acts out the part of Kang to try and not create paradoxes. But when you're not dealing with on-screen Marvel content, you get surprises. You get Khonshu. You get a Moon Knight. And we got Apocalypse. And rightly so, by the way. If you're dealing with ancient Egypt and someone, as a tyrant trying to imprison all of Egypt, Apocalypse might have something to say about that. So I was actually disappointed that he wasn't featured in it more. I expected him to kind of come back.
Yeah, it was weird. It was like a cameo.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues, did it end with Apocalypse showing up? And then you're like,
yeah.
oh, cool.
And
then
it's like
3 panels later.
And then he's like, yeah, I'll help you get to the future, but I'm going to send you the long way around where
you're going to hang out for a few thousand years.
Yeah. Which I believe they did that on Star Trek Next Generation at one point. They buried Data's head back in Mark Twain buried his head. Yeah. So anyway, sometimes that's how you have to time travel. You have to go the long way around.
Yeah.
They did that in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well. So there's a few different instances of that. But talk a little bit about getting to, this is a very self-contained story. And I think we benefit from reading this as a collected volume. Reading this month to month, I think would kind of take away from the nature. I mean, like any story, if you can read it beginning to end in one sitting, but I think this one in particular really lends itself to really just being read as a collection instead of having to, read the story over the course of 5 months. But what did you think sort of about, were you surprised by the same things that I was? Like, the fact that we got Khonshu, the fact that we got Apocalypse?
It's one of those, I mean, comics always, of course, have crossovers. I mean,
sure.
That's,
yeah.
And Marvel Cinematic obviously understood that very early on. It's like, yeah, this is why we loved comics as kids. It's like, oh yeah, Spider-Man's. We were in New York. Yeah, Spider-Man's probably going to show up at some point.
Yeah.
And so I think the cameos are really smart in terms of the very organic, like the idea that you're in ancient Egypt, you're probably going to run into Khonshu. You're gonna run in to Apocalypse. So I think it was really smartly done. It's good too to give it almost like this context within the comic book universe, and not just the idea of like the history of man. And so I think on that end, it actually was pretty smart linking it to these other sort of small storylines. I agree. It seemed a little strange to sort of bring up Apocalypse and sort of
not do more with him.
Yeah, it seemed like maybe a little bit of a missed opportunity because Apocalypse is such an interesting character. But I think if I read this week, month to month, I'm not sure if I would have liked it as much. It's interesting. It's like binge TV, right? And the creator of one of the writers on Supernatural, who also does The Boys, he had this really long tirade in Variety, I think it was, where he was like, basically, I'm perfectly happy working in this culture now where we can work on all the episodes at once and release them all at once. But my issue is the idea of like, oh, just give it 3 episodes and you'll be fine. And in his mind, because Eric Kripke, because he, wrote for network TV, it's like that never works. Like you can't do that in network TV. There's a grind to it. And also the idea that every sort of episode should move the needle some. And so I think on that end, I'm very happy I got to binge this. And particularly because it was looping into itself in a way that I think would have been less effective if I read issue 4 3 months after issue 1. Because then I would have had to literally pick up issue 1 and be like, wait, what was that again?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you would have like side by sided some panels, which I guess, could have been an advent in its own right. But for the most part, it really is. There are those series that you watch and you think, oh, this would have been better as a binge. The example that I used from, as recent as last year was that due to travel and just other things, the Star Wars, the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, I watched it in like a day. I watched it over 2 days. And people who watched it over the course of 6 weeks, I think, enjoyed it less. But I was like, no, actually, here's all the things I really liked about it. And, and I think sometimes when you don't have the time to sit and then wonder, and also whatever the virtual version of water cooler talk is, to not have that, sometimes it can increase your enjoyment a little bit more. It is fun. The inverse is that I appreciate the fun of being able to talk about stuff. I like when stuff comes out weekly, when it's content that everybody seems to universally agree about. When everybody saw the season 2 finale of Mandalorian on the same day.
Right.
When we were all watching Loki week to week to keep it in the Marvel family, there was so much to talk about. And by the way, Eric and I are part of a show that we do on my YouTube channel called Marvel Movie Talk. And you can find us over there just as soon as there's Marvel movies or TV to talk about.
Yeah, although right now they punted on so much of it.
They punted on so much of it that it's like, well, we know we'll talk about the Guardians. So we'll get the Guardians in May. And that'll tie into our entry for next month here in the book club. But yeah, I think this story really lends itself to, whether it's one sitting or if it's just over, a couple days, reading it quickly and not having to wait because of the way that you're like, oh yeah, this was the thing we saw earlier. And I found it to be interesting, but to your point, I think I would have liked this a lot less if I'd had to read it, over time. And I thought that, following Nathaniel Richards and just sort of dealing with, everything that he contends with, I found it to be entertaining in this setting, in at this pace. Obviously, the inclusion of Doom was essential. Another character that I could have used more of. I like that the Fantastic Four are basically window dressing. There's like they come in a little bit. He doesn't even mention that it's like, oh yeah, that's I don't know how many great grandfathers it is when it's 1,000 years. But it's one of those. So, but I think that. It's interesting how at the center, basically a cornerstone of the character from so long ago is basically this idea of the love that got away, in various ways and continued to get away. So this having variants and alternate versions of Ravonna, I thought was interesting part of the storytelling, and I feel like they did a good job making each one seem different enough. And yet the different versions of Kang / Nathaniel Richards / Ramatut, always fascinated by her. What did you think about the story really centering around that relationship?
Well, it's always what we need. We need something we can understand emotionally. And that to that end, this is where the introduction of Kang in Ant-Man left me, wanting more, because he's talking about all this, oh, I need to conquer all the worlds. It's like, well, why? Like that was the one piece of it that, I understood Kang feeling betrayed and left to die, to quote my buddy Khan, buried alive. Alive.
This is City Alpha 5.
I've done something worse than I've hurt you. So now we would just get spend the whole day talking like Ricardo Montalban. But the fine Corinthian story leather of this,
very nice.
It had a really good emotional hook. And then it becomes incredibly relatable, weirdly enough, right? And that idea too that I thought was really powerful was like almost like this idea of like, let's say you get someone back in your life, but they're not the same person you remember. They don't remember you the same way. I don't know, it's like seeing an ex from like decades ago, and like it's all of a sudden it feels like they got recast. Which, by the way, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend very smartly did this when they had to replace an actor midway through the show. And the way they explained it was like how your memory about someone changes or the reality changes. And I'm like, that is a really clever way to write around it. And so I think putting a love story at the center of this made a lot of the decisions just more relatable, emotional. There's a great logic to it, and also really powerful. I mean, there were some moments like the idea of like being between the stars. I thought was a really kind of lovely romantic line. And then in the end, you realize the cage he's in alone, and I think that that really they really struck the landing with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's that great moment, the line, the repeated reference of between the stars, and then the whole thing starts off with this quote from Alexander the Great,
right.
about is it not worthy of despair that there are an infinite number of worlds to conquer, and I cannot become the master of even one? And Kang really took that to heart, because he's like, why, any schlub can master one world, but let's see if I can go ahead and master infinite worlds, repeatedly and throughout. So I think that one of the reasons why, at least presumably why this story came so highly recommended, is that you get an understanding of Kang on the personal level that you probably wouldn't, especially from older stories. If we were to have, picked up a Kang collection that featured stories from the 60s through the 80s, I don't think that there's really this level of introspection for the character. I just, I don't think they had spent enough time for it. And then part of it that I've often wondered about this is just at what point did they start to think that these characters were actually connected? Like, you have to figure the first appearance of Rama Tut in, like, I don't know, Fantastic Four or 5 or whatever it was, wasn't like, oh yeah, but this guy's actually a time traveler named Kang. Like, the first time that Kang showed up probably wasn't Rama Tut yet, and somebody like weaves it all together. And it's like, and let's not forget Immortus. And I believe even Iron Lad is part of the one of the many faces that Kang wears, so you kind of, it's interesting when you can kind of go in and connect those dots, as brilliant as it is when somebody, a creator of some kind will tell you like, oh yeah, no, I had this all mapped out from episode 1. Sometimes they do, but usually, you can really get the feel for, it's a good example. Lost. They sure didn't know what they were doing. And by the time they tied it up, they reminded you.
I almost was going to say that, Christian. It's hysterical because I've read a lot of interviews with those writers and seen them interviewed. And,
sure.
And like half of them were like, oh yeah, it was all mapped out. And others were like, nah, we didn't know. Yeah. And so it almost depends who you ask. I think part of the fun they have is perpetually effing with us even now.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, there's no way they knew that smoke monster. There's no way when they introduce that smoke monster, they're like, oh yeah, no, it's when they throw Locke into a hole or Locke threw someone else into a hole, and he's going to turn into
the smoke monster is a guy who looks like he should be doing one of those Old Spice commercials, and it's not something that they had thought of at that point.
Not at all.
Not at all. So,
well, and I think that's also what's really been fun about writing in these universes is like, like I'm starting to swim close to those waters. Like, what if I went in there and sort of like explored, like, why not make this character in that one of the same or a variant, and even like when with the multiverse, I mean, it gives them sort of carte blanche to just F around repeatedly. And,
totally, yeah.
And well, John Krasinski, we don't know if we're going to get him for Reed Richards, but for now, why not? And
yeah, let's have him into spaghetti. As Reed Richards. Yeah, turn immediately.
In fact, I would argue probably the dumbest version of Reed Richards.
Yeah, the one that let himself get turned into spaghetti. Yeah.
In 5 seconds. It wasn't even like there was like, well, something went wrong or he got betrayed. No. He just was like, oh, I think I can make this work.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Chef Boyardee. It made no sense. So,
yeah, it's like,
but they can get away with it.
It's like Colossus running up to Magneto. You know, you're like, wait, this is actually the worst matchup you could have tried to map out here. You know, Peter Rasputin, not in metal form, has a much better chance against Magneto. I think it's, you know, one of the themes of this story is that time means nothing to Kang. And even Kang himself seems to forget that at times. And he, you know, he gets reminded of it. And I think you know, just sort of the way that they play with time, it's also, time means nothing to Kang, but it's also like you can't use time to avoid things forever. You could run away for a little while, but it seems like you talked at the beginning about how some things are inevitable. It's inevitable that Nathaniel Richards becomes Kang and then inspires Nathaniel Richards to try and overtake Kang. You know what I mean? It's just like,
right.
He's going to, like, even if it's, well, I'm going to do things differently this time. Yeah, but you're still going to end up in the same place. No matter what you do, it just might take a little bit longer. You might go somewhere else in between. But, you know, I think that there is something to be said for destiny in this story, you know, that no matter what skill set you have, no matter how fancy the armor is, no matter who helps you along the way, ultimately you end up right back where you started from, which it's, you know, it's like there's this picture at the beginning of the book where he's, you know, sitting in that chair, and then it ends.
Yep.
He's doing exactly the same thing. In fact, that's one of the pictures that you sent to me, Eric, when we do these. He always sends so much stuff along that you know, then I have to try and sort through all of it. But
there's a compliment in there that if you use a pickaxe and a light, you might find.
Yeah, but this is the one. This is the one that I was trying to show. Is this image that's sort of, you know, the end, never ever the end, and you know, he's just sort of sitting there taking it all in. But let's take a journey through some of the images that you were kind enough to send my way, Eric. I'm going to go in sort of a file number order. So you took this moment, which is the fist of Mr. Fantastic looking to take out Ramatut, basically. And, you know, just sort of the idea of, it's a great sentence. Dressing as a god will not make it so. And, you know, I think that's something that we could all learn to remember more often. You know, it's a lesson.
It's funny, when you zoom in,
Yeah.
you realize how badly drawn the mouth is. Like,
now that you say it, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's going to be my new icon and logo across the board.
The British pop rock artist, badly drawn mouth, I believe, is who we're talking about.
Yeah,
not that that's much of an inside reference at all.
That
really.
is so good, though. I get it.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you appreciate it.
I will listen to Badly Drawn Boy right after this, and you're.
I mean, the About a Boy soundtrack is a good listen for everyone. So yeah, so you know, we saw a little bit of the Fantastic Four there, and then you know, we have this.
Well, and actually, I shared this as a question. Actually, sorry to interrupt, Christian, because I wasn't sure if this was like a legendary battle. Like it feels like it must have been.
It strikes me as probably the first time that the Avengers faced off against Kang, which is fairly early in the Avengers book. Just judging from who the team is, it's fairly early on. You know, there was a time where a reference to something like this would feature a note from the editor.
Yeah, say, with the asterisk. Yeah.
Way back in Avengers #7 or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and when you get Giant Man with the big antenna, you know, that's from a very specific moment in time. We do get a lot of some good interactions between Kang and Nathaniel Richards, but it really does come back to this point, which Eric has tried to instill in his children, and I've done the same to my children: never love. And you know, every time that my kids
and our wives would definitely double down on that.
They would absolutely agree. Yeah. And anytime my kid comes in for a hug, I was like, what have I told you? And then they hang their head and they go, like, oh,
they walk away in shame.
But also the follow-up, in all of time and space, it is the only way in which you will be conquered. Love. And seems like good advice from old Kang, right, Eric?
It's giving it's totally telling him the warning, and in some ways too, it's like he does that so he'll fight harder against that, in the hopes of maybe this version will be able to sort of get over that hurdle. So in some ways, like he's resigned himself to never loving, and yet by saying this, he's like challenging this young buck to like go out there and see if maybe this is the way to actually like conquer this problem. And of course, turns out not to be, including that the montage of all the different ways his love died. Is it Ravana?
I think Ravana, yeah.
Yeah, all the
yeah,
ways.
like one of them, she just gets the plague.
Oh, know? Right. And did you ever read or see The Time Machine?
It's quite some time ago I saw but
a terrible film, but there's one moment where the whole thing is he's traveling in time to try and save his wife, and at one point he's like, all right, just stay here, don't do anything, and then a runaway horse just tramples over her. And I know that moment was what was I going to say, that moment was supposed to be tragic, but when you watch it, it is not.
Someone getting trampled by a horse is usually
pretty
funny.
goofy. But that moment there, even the plague thing, it's like, geez, like he can't get a break, and it means also too he's had to witness her die, countless times, which I think is they didn't really kind of focus on that as much. The idea of the grief and despair of losing her time and time again, like they did in the early part, but then it's almost like he gets numb to it, which is the part that really stings. It's like, oh my God, he's seen it so many times, like he's had to harden himself because of its inevitability, and with that little bit of optimism and hope that maybe this time will be different.
Yeah, no, I think that it is the way in which he'll be conquered, and I guess ultimately is, because there is always the hope of it'll be different this time, even though you've had multiple lifetimes and centuries to remind you it's not going to be different. It's going to be exactly the same.
Right.
And to just sort of watch that unfold over these 5 issues was definitely an interesting way to go. So then you have one of the early moments, one of the interactions between the first Ravonna we meet with the face paint happy. I mean, just look at this. This looks like MTV Spring Break, in all honesty, the way I remember it.
This is actually an image from Christian's wedding.
Yes, it for our audio audience, this is a moment where they are basically around the campfire. It's very celebratory, and yes, Nathaniel Richards looks as awkward dancing as I did on my big day as well. What was it about this specific image that I feel I've accurately described for our audio audience? What was it about this that jumped out at you, Eric?
Oh, well, I think the dance itself was just kind of wonderfully ridiculous. But
is it perhaps on par with, brace yourselves for this reference,
I'm ready,
the Balki Bartakamus Dance of Joy?
Yes. Don't be ridiculous. Of course it's great. Yeah, cousin Christian, I tell you, this moment here, it's so many things at once. Even there's that guy in the background on the left side of the frame. I don't know what he's doing, but go no, scroll down. Now I feel like it's a Blade Runner. Enhance. He's like, we'll just say his arms are very close to his crotch.
Well, to keep it with the MTV theme, this was an extra on The Grind with Eric Mees. Yeah,
he was the guy who wasn't asked to come back the following week.
Right. But then, but look, everybody's celebrating in their own way.
Sure.
That's really the key to this story.
And then honestly, it reminded me of my wedding until the third bar closed. 5 minutes
right,
early.
Exactly.
And then,
but then of course
this is where we live.
Yeah, this is where we live. This is the just the embrace, the hand touching, basically, is what we have here. This is where we live. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that it was all depicted really well. And, you can kind of see young Nathaniel get all wrapped up by this. By the way, they really gloss off the terrible story of his classmates who disliked him so much that they slit his throat, and he spent a year in the hospital recovering. It makes you think that the utopian future of the 31st century is perhaps not all it's cracked up to be.
Kids will be kids. All right.
Yeah,
We've all, I mean, you grew up in New York. Have you ever not slit someone's throat for like a year? No.
You don't got to tell me. In the mean streets of Greenwood Lake, New York, those are the mean streets.
I know Delaware was a threat of actually putting sales tax on something. That was our weapon. But yeah, in the space between the stars, it's a really lovely poetic turn of phrase that, of course,
I too quickly went to the slap. I meant to actually stick with this. Yeah.
Was that a commentary? In fact, that slap, I think, the reason the next slide, which is the slap.
Well, does this look like something from last year's Academy Awards?
It did. It also Batman and Robin, the meme.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which I think I might have sent you to.
You did send me. Yeah, let me.
Yeah, no, it reminds me.
Yeah. It's the Batman and Robin slap is basically keep Catwoman's name out your damn mouth.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's true. That Kang slap is the new version of the Batman and Robin slap. For people who've read the story,
Batman seems so joyful to do it in that, and in this one, Kang actually looked kind of mad.
Yeah, no, he's very mad at himself.
It's interesting too. You could see the different, the penciling here is really strong. Like we're saying before about some of the mouths looked kind of wonky, but this is an image where I think there's wonderful detail in the face. And that's not necessarily
really getting to see, the slap, the bloody nose of Nathaniel Richard. But then let's not undersell just how angry Kang really is.
His expression looks great.
Yeah, look, I think some of the books that we've done here, the art can be a little hit or miss. It can be inconsistent.
Sure.
But I found Carlos Magno, who I don't believe I've had the pleasure of reading anything that he's done before. I think one of the most important things with a miniseries is to have consistency.
Sure.
Especially in this day and age, if you can't have the same penciler and inking team on the entire book, you've definitely done something wrong, And so I appreciated that. And some of these visuals were actually very stunning. And I agree that this was one that really stood out to me because of just the brutality of smacking your younger self in the face, I think that they captured it quite well.
The texture even of his costume, it was really interesting in that frame too.
Yeah, but then also the basically the Ramatut, gun turret that seems like something out of Larry Hama's G.I. Joe #1. It's very impressive, the fact that this iteration of Ramatut it utilizes the future technology at his disposal. He's not.
It seems like. Well, I was thinking. I think Shield stole his patent.
They probably did.
Yeah, because it basically looks like it was at the helicarrier. And
that's true. It's very helicarrier. And we did talk a little bit about Doom. And did you feel that you picked an image from Doom where he wants to forego a more traditional monologue by giving a short monologue?
Yeah, it was actually a moment that I thought was funny, but also tonally a little funky because most of this is not particularly self-aware. It's not, even though it's meta in that it keeps circling in on itself, but it's not.
Sure.
It's not really winking to the reader.
No, absolutely.
That's not the style of writing. So when Doom shows up and suddenly feels like he's breaking that fourth wall for a moment, I thought that was an interesting choice, and it was funny. I mean, I didn't bump up against it, as you young people say, but I did find this was a curious choice that suddenly, after having the storyline is pretty straight in its tone, my motivations would be meaningless to you both, not to mention superfluous, since you will both soon be dead. It's as if the dialogue entered it was like a nudge and a wink to like the 60s style of writing these.
Yeah, no, and I think that it's very intentional. You know,
Oh, sure.
that mouthful of words is definitely out of Stan Lee's back pocket. You know, it's
Maybe
it's
maybe that's what it is, like a little bit of a it's like the Wilhelm scream in
right.
movies, like just almost like a tip of the hat to Stan Lee.
Yeah. And just getting to see some of the armies and things like that, I think was fun. But
Can I see the previous
obviously,
slide, Christian?
you want the previous slide?
For
Okay, sure.
just one moment, because I thought that was an interesting theme. Slaves will become slavers when given a chance to hold the whip.
Yeah.
That's like the whole point of the story in a lot of ways, and
Yeah, no,
a very
I think you're
powerful
right. I think
message.
it's a 5-issue exercise in the fact that slaves will become slavers when given a chance to hold the whip. Absolutely.
Yeah, Lauren
Um,
and I, my wife and I, have a joke whenever we, I don't know, watch like a TV show or movie, and there's clearly a line that's the theme,
yeah.
and we'll just pretend to do a shot and go theme,
Yeah,
and
it's
that
also like it's also like every once in a while, in a movie when they say the name of the movie, it's like, oh, it's like
so what they do in how did this get made? Is it Geostorm?
right.
That's become their rallying cry. It's a geostorm, like. So yeah, and that one too. I think the image is great. I mean, it feels almost like if George Miller did a Marvel movie, it would look like this.
I would love to see that, by the way.
Well, I
The
mean,
George Miller.
he was supposed to do Justice League.
But that's
I
not a
mean,
Marvel movie.
I know, but
No, I know. He was supposed to.
for the
Um,
audience listening, I just rolled my eyes,
yeah.
almost out Rodney Dangerfield size roll of my eyes, and even the
Uh,
dog just grunted in the background at
yeah.
that.
So the multiple times we're given the anguish for multiple Ravonas dying, and I thought that they do a good job in capturing that. So I assume that that's why the image where uh, Kang is holding the most superhero-y version
Hmm.
of her, the suit basically,
And
it feels
the most sexually dressed, I would say too, like this
right.
outfit
Yeah, this is
versus her
this is
other
something
outfit.
that Wanda left hanging in her closet.
Right, right,
She's like, yeah, I'm not going to go with the blue, but do you mind if
right.
I wear this? Sure, go ahead. But yeah, I think that it's an important part of the storytelling, obviously, is to have these good, compelling visuals that really stand out for you. And there was, I think this is the standard
Okay.
cover for issue 5. It's the persistence of Kang, basically, the melting clocks, the melting Kang.
Yeah.
I would, as a younger man, if I had my own living space entirely, this seems like something I would want to frame and put up. Is the cover to issue 5 of this series, which is the melting Kang and the melting clocks.
It's when they hired Salvador Dali to do one of their covers.
Right, exactly.
Many years after he died, but they found a way because and the fact that that's actually the actual issue, because I assume that was a variant, but it's
I
not,
believe that's
right?
the actual cover, though,
Yeah, and
because
that's kind of cool. 'Cause
and by the way,
it
this collection did a great job of showing you the variants, which you
yeah,
don't
yeah.
always get. Sometimes you do, but there were some very cool covers in here. And again, this will be lost on our audio audience, but the last image I have from you, I have no idea what this is. It's it's a bald gentleman who looks like comedian Robert Kelly, and he is basically a gumball, a pink gumball. There's a
That
Marvel
that was
character,
I didn't expect you to include it here, but I'm glad you did.
but I don't know what it is because it was in
It's
there.
actually
So,
from it was a recent discovery from a short-lived reality show called Who Wants to Be a Superhero? And
oh,
and I said it to you just because I thought it was the stupidest looking thing I've ever seen. I'm like, well, Christian would love this.
mission
But
accomplished, by the way.
and that was a and it does tie back to Marvel because it was a Stan Lee produced show. And literally, I do recommend for our audio or visual audience, take a look
Is
at the
that you look that
trailer.
up?
You got to go on YouTube, look at the trailer. It is absurd. And I actually knew the guy who won that first season.
Really?
Yeah, and they had some kind of deal too with like Sci-Fi Channel that their character, because the whole idea, you come in with a character, the character would be featured in one of the Sci-Fi Friday Night movies and also
Oh,
get its own
interesting.
comic book.
Well, it took me back to the John Byrne creation, Pink Pearl, from the cover to Alpha Flight 22.
Well, Turner D. Century just got dethroned by my new favorite character. I did
the
not.
team up of Pink Pearl, and taking out both North Star and Aurora.
Wait, was this like Blob in a dress? Like,
it
looks like the Blob.
I think I think you're stature shaming now, but yes, she definitely does look like, I believe his name is Fred Dukes, the Blob. Yeah, it looks like him in a dress. So it was fun to take both the visual the visual journey with you and some of the other things. I think final thought on this book is I would agree with the recommendation for, do you really want to understand Kang? Now there's so much more of the character to explore, but these 5 issues, I think I don't know, I feel like I have a much better understanding for the modern interpretation of Kang heading into his inclusion in the MCU and the series. Would you agree that this book is a good read for that sort of a background, Eric?
Sure, and I don't think they would ever do this, but I mean, a spin-off movie or a series of just this story would be incredible.
A Disney Plus,
yeah,
4-part series, that would be great. I would love to see that.
Because I think emotionally, it really does a wonderful job of getting us to understand him. I still go back to that same question, is like that sense of, I have to conquer every universe. That's the part I'm still trying to figure out. Now, in this one, they do a nice job with the whole, his lost love, and it's all going back to her. Every version of him goes back to her. That really works. So I'm curious if, Marvel goes there. Like Thanos, right? Didn't Thanos lose his family at one point?
His daughter. Not Gamora, his actual.
No, right. The one that, and it will explain why he had an attachment to Gamora.
But not Nebula, as the trailer for Guardians points out, that he carved out her eyes and replaced them, and they're a lovely shade of black. Which is a nice way to transition into our next entry here in the book club, which will be tentatively scheduled to appear, as they say, on April 22nd. Happy Earth Day, everyone. Because of the inclusion of Adam Warlock in the next Guardians film, is a more recent story by Jim Starlin and Alan Davis called The Infinity Entity. It's a newer Adam Warlock tale, but it's a self-contained volume, I believe, also of 5 issues. It's got Alan Davis and Ron Lim involved, both phenomenal artists whose work I very much appreciate. And I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Eric?
No, I was going to say, for our radio audience, the cover also very much looks like myself, with my chiseled good looks, my flowing, very thick blonde hair.
Actually, now that you say it, it looks like Rocky from Rocky Horror Picture Show. When he steps out in the loincloth, basically. So that'll be our next entry here in the book club. We are doing back-to-back Marvel, but
that's okay.
I believe after that we're gonna have to read Flashpoint, and I think we'll bring on some haters, I think, because it'll be easier than finding people who truly appreciate the Flashpoint story. But next month we'll be talking Adam Warlock as we gear up for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. In the interim, Eric, where can people find you?
Oh, come by to Twitter or Instagram. Say hello to Count Eric Connor, ERICCONNER, not OR. No relation to John Connor. None of his talents or skills. Maybe some of his whining from Terminator 3. And that's about it.
Right, yes. Well, I always like to think of you as our own personal Edward Furlong. And as always, I can be found at Christian DMZ. Subscribe to the Blackcast, BLADTCAST. and you'll find our show, Marvel Movie Talk, when we've got movies to talk about. Should be interviewing the great Roy Thomas very soon, so follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ for a link to that when it does present itself. We're also covering Star Trek Picard over there right now. We'll do a season ender for The Mandalorian, as we always do. So plenty of content to be found over there. And also, we over here on Geekscape, it was actually posted as in the main Geekscape feed. I sat in for Jonathan, but you can also find the video to a 1 hour, 45-minute conversation that my friend John Pett and I had with Kenneth Johnson about the 40th anniversary of V. And I highly recommend that conversation, not so much because I'm just a participant in it, but also because it was just, he had great stories, great background on that show, that film, but also just Hollywood in general. There's a story about a pitch with a network executive who fell asleep while Kenneth and Kelsey Grammer pitched something. So I blame Frasier for that. He put them to sleep with his soothing vocals. So you can find that over here. And as I said, I can be found on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. We appreciate everybody who always finds us here in the Geekscape Book Club. Please subscribe, and you'll get our monthly episodes, as we said, next month, October. I don't know why I keep just picking months out of it. April 22nd.
It's actually the 5th of Adar. From the Hebrew calendar.
We'll be reading the Infinity Entity, and so join us for that. You keep reading them, we'll keep talking about them, and we'll see you next time here on the Geekscape Book Club. So long, everybody.